Welcome to Forbes Movies. Joining me now is Scott Mendelson, a Forbes entertainment analyst and box office pundit. Scott, thank you so much for joining me today.
Always a pleasure. Thank you for being here. Once again, our podcast is sponsored by V8 Sparkling Energy. Please send me some because they're expensive.
Sounds good. So, to kick things off today, what were the winners and losers at the box office this weekend?
We're mostly winners, I would say. I mean, there was a lot of discourse online about Halloween Ends and whether the film's day and date availability on Peacock was a definitive factor in its theatrical opening weekend. And I would say it absolutely was not. Um, there was some punditry and tracking that suggested a $55 million opening. So when it only came in at 41 million, everyone was like, oh no, they wrecked the film because of Peacock. The film was never going to open at $55 million. People did not like Halloween Kills. People did not like Halloween Ends. Reviews were negative, as were the reviews for Halloween Kills. Halloween opened with 77 in 2018 because it was sold as sort of a lightning in a bottle. Jamie Lee Curtis is back after 20 years, and the film was implicitly sold as a movie of the moment in terms of it's about generational trauma. It's about the Me Too movement. The Strode women are smashing the patriarchy. I apologize if I sound condescending, but having seen the movie before the marketing campaign began, I think a lot of that stuff was sort of invented on the PR tour. Halloween Kills, which, isn't a great film, but at least it was a film that knew what it was trying to be while they were making the movie. Anyway, beside the point. Point being, Halloween was an event. Halloween Kills and Halloween Ends were always going to be like more conventional sequels. And if you look at trilogy enders that weren't super duper events like 50 Shades Freed, The Maze Runner, The Death Trials, even The Rise of Skywalker to a certain extent. The film did make $1 billion, so I mean, it wasn't like it was a flop, nor were any of the other two that I discussed. They opened about 80% of what their respective second film / sequel predecessors opened with. Halloween Ends, despite bad reviews and despite divisive discourse, opened with about 85% of Halloween Kills' $49 million debut.
So
So
that's
the
not
idea that
bad.
this film is going to open at 55, I mean, not every end of an era, not every final chapter gets a finale bump. They're not all Deathly Hallows Part 2. They're not all Logan, which was successfully sold as a genuine event. It's Hugh Jackman's last run as Wolverine, so we thought. It's an R-rated movie, which is, he's never done one of those as Wolverine before. There were a dozen reasons why it was a unique event unto itself beyond just, oh, it's just another Wolverine sequel. Halloween Ends, which I like a little bit more than most people, but that's fine. I'm on a contrarian streak of late. That one was just sold as it's another Halloween sequel in this franchise. And yes, it's a finale to the Laurie Strode, Michael Myers story, but we've already had several of those over the line. In the same way
This was
that
the
Rise of
13th, yeah.
Skywalker was sold as the end of the Skywalker saga. Well, I guess if you don't count Return of the Jedi.
So, Scott, I have a
Um,
question for you. What was the point of releasing it on Peacock and theaters on the same day, opposed to like the Elvis strategy where they release it in theaters and then later down the line they put it on HBO Max?
well, they did that with Halloween Kills last year as well. And that film, again, opened to what I would argue was a best case scenario $49 million opening, legged out to 92 domestic with 131 worldwide. And the stat that I like to throw out is that Halloween Kills domestically had a better retention from Halloween than did a Halloween 2 from Carpenter's Halloween, Rob Zombie's Halloween 2 from Rob Zombie's Halloween, and Halloween Resurrection from Halloween H2O, which was the first time Jamie Lee Curtis came back as Laurie Strode, but she's not going to give up and she's going to fight back this time, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I quite like H2O, so I was sort of rolling my eyes in 2018 when they were arguing this is the first, they're trying to sell something old as something new.
Mm-hmm.
I apologize. I'm getting off script for your question. At the time, Jason Blum said he did this because he was disappointed by how poorly Christopher Landon's Freaky performed when it opened in October of 2020, which was weird because that was all due respect, that was a much more challenging time in terms of COVID related to box office. Um, and Peacock had a very good October month, 2021, in terms of new subscribers and viewership. And I think there was just the impression that, well, it obviously didn't damage the box office last time. We've only got 15 million paying subscribers. So, why not do it? We're not going to hurt the movie's theatrical that much. And we could also stick to whatever contract negotiations we did last year in terms of the stars that thought they were getting a conventional theatrical release that are now getting a day and date. Because, Blumhouse films tend to be reasonably budgeted with a lot of back end thrown in the participants. So, for example, Ethan Hawke theoretically does The Purge for scale, but if it makes a lot of money, he makes a lot of money. And I think it was just a matter of, well, we did it last year. It didn't hurt anybody. Why not try it again this year? And I would argue that it didn't hurt anybody this time. And I guess I very much disagree with the overall narrative that Peacock was this, movie killer in terms of Halloween Ends theatrical potential. The idea that it was going to open to 55 was frankly ridiculous. It was unrealistic. It was not in relation to the film itself and reasonable precedent. And it's one of those dumb situations that, sort of when I was a kid was my villain origin story as a juvenile box office analyst. Like Pearl Harbor was never going to open to $100 million in 4 days over Memorial Day weekend in 2000. But when it only opened to 75, it ended up being tagged as a disappointment. Blair Witch 2, Book of Shadows was somehow pegged at opening at $30 million, even though the first Blair Witch project opened with $30 million the previous year. And half the people who saw that film in theaters hated it. So you really think the sequel rushed out a year later is going to pull anywhere near that? Of course not. But when it only opened to 15 million, it was tagged as a flop.
Shouldn't they then sell it as shouldn't they underpromise then? So it's not perceived as a flop? Okay.
Unfortunately, there is a perception, there's a perception in the media and among the real world, or at least perpetually online, that tracking is supposed to be a prediction. It's not. Tracking, when I talk about tracking, I talk about third-party companies that do research and polling, and they give numbers to the studios anywhere from 5 to 3 weeks out from opening weekend. Mm-hmm. It's not supposed to be public, but it has become public. It's been less public since COVID, but it's often used as an ironclad prediction to say this is what the film is going to make. If it does anything under that, then it has failed. Or if they're able to lowball the numbers, the studio is able to massage expectations, and it opens higher than that. Oh wow, it's a surprising success. Tracking is supposed to be a tool for studios to adjust their marketing choices in the final lap before a film's opening weekend. So if it's playing really well with young dudes but not young women, you maybe cut some trailers, stereotypically speaking, I apologize, that appeal to young women. Or if it's doing very well with kids but not their parents, you maybe cut some spots that make it look less juvenile. It's very simplistic explanation, but it's pretty much how that works. Unfortunately, over the last 15, 20 years, it's become this publicly aware number that gets used as an ironclad prediction, mm-hmm. where this is what the film is going to do. And sometimes tracking is wrong, and that's fine. It's not an exact science. It's not supposed to be an exact science. And when you have tracking that's released, 3-4 weeks before opening weekend, there's a lot of factors that can make that go up or down. Reviews, that's one of the big ones. If a film is tracking at this number and then the reviews come out early enough and say, holy crap, this movie's great, maybe you can get that up. Studios are obviously going to spend more on marketing the week of release versus 5 weeks out from release. You had this ridiculous meme going around in 2017 that Wonder Woman was being under-marketed. This was like a week before Guardians of the Galaxy 2 opened. You think Warner Brothers was holding some of their stuff in reserve until Guardians came out? Maybe, possibly? Yes, the answer is yes. The film opened with $105 million over 3 days, which is a massive overperformance in terms of tracking. So this was a case, I think, of too many pundits, analysts, and regular people picking the high number as realistic
Hmm.
and then trying to find a reason why they were wrong.
Got it.
Do I think Peacock was a factor in the film opening closer to 40 million than 50 million? Sure. Obviously, it's available for free on a streaming service that 15 million people pay for. My wife and my two older kids watched it on Peacock on Thursday night. I was doing a third party podcast for a friend of mine. He hated the film. I liked the film, and we were joshing back and forth. And she was sending me text messages on why it was terrible. Yes, she shouldn't be texting during the movie, but I digress. Um,
So, Halloween Ends was the latest horror movie to be released this Halloween season. Like, there was films like Pearl, Barbarian, and Smile. So, what movie so far of those is on track to be the winner of the horror movies this season?
Smile lost the battle. It fell to number 2 with a $12.6 million opening weekend, but it is absolutely winning the war. It
Nice.
dropped just 33% in its third weekend after a shocking 18% drop in weekend 2, which is 6 cents levels, get out levels. It's at 71 domestic. It will probably crawl past $100 million domestic, which is incredible for an R-rated original, star-free, and all due respect, Parker Finn is no Jordan Peele in terms of awareness and prestige, not yet.
And was it supposed to
Um,
perform that well?
what was that?
Was Smile supposed to perform this well?
No, it was intended as a Paramount Plus release until it got excellent test rating scores. And to their credit, Paramount decided this belongs in theaters. We're going to roll the dice.
Hmm.
And now they win money, lots and lots and lots of money. And let me get my yellow highlighter out. And because the film was a smashing theatrical success, it will be more successful on Paramount Plus than if it had just been a Paramount Plus premiere.
Why is that?
Because it already has the awareness
Hmm.
and buzz and popularity and word of mouth that comes with being a successful theatrical release. Those that wanted to see it that for whatever reason didn't get out to a theater, or maybe they liked it so much they would like to watch it again because once it comes to Paramount Plus, they're going to do that. But if the film had just been a premiere just on streaming, it probably would have come and gone in a week and a half. And that applies even to very good streaming premieres like Prey, um, Chippendale's Rescue Rangers, which won an Emmy, and it's very funny. But and that was always intended as a Disney Plus premiere,
Hmm.
and I'm not sure if they could have gotten the rights to all of the characters that they use in that film if it had been a theatrical release. But that's outside of that's above my purview. But I do think that film would have been a solid theatrical success. I mean, it opened before I think it opened right before Memorial Day weekend when there was nothing else in theaters, or right after Memorial Day weekend. Um, but unfortunately, what we're seeing is even very good streaming premieres, even on Netflix, they tend to be, flash in a pan in the first 10 days and then they get replaced by the next big thing. To be fair, that's Netflix's business model. And I don't think anyone goes into it expecting otherwise. There are some cases where you have a film that sort of catches the zeitgeist and sticks around a little longer, like the military-based romantic drama Purple Hearts, which almost got as much viewership in the first 28 days as The Gray Man, which was a $200 million would-be franchise launcher starring Ryan Gosling and Chris Evans. But that's an entirely different conversation. Um, and as far as what streaming is and isn't supposed to be, everyone's talking about House of the Dragon and Rings of Power and which one's bigger and which one's moving the needle. They're both getting their asses kicked by the Jeffrey Dahmer miniseries on Netflix in terms of total viewing and in terms of buzz and all that jazz. That's not saying either of those shows are not successful in terms of raw viewership, but it's again, it's a matter of, especially when it comes to streaming, the thing you think is going to win is not always the thing that wins.
Will House of Dragon, could that win the long game? Because the Jeffrey Dahmer series is just a limited series. That buzz will die down probably within a few weeks. But House of Dragon,
Yes.
okay.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, it's. You are absolutely correct. People seem to genuinely enjoy House of Dragon.
Hmm.
I think it will run for a long and successful, series, and it does sort of debunk the notion that nobody cared about Games of Thrones anymore after the mediocre finale,
Do you think it
which
will
is good
out?
news for Star Wars, by the way,
Do you think it will
when the next Star
outperform?
Wars movie comes out.
Do you think it will outperform
Because
Game of Thrones?
I'm sorry, what was that?
Do you think it will outperform Game of Thrones?
I mean, outperform. I mean, in terms of raw ratings, probably, just because more people are starting on the ground up. But
Hmm.
will as many people be watching the finale of House of Dragon as showed up for the house finale of Game of Thrones? I don't know because this the in 6-7 years, I assume the viewership will be even more fragmented than it is now. Um, Now, Ring of Power is well liked. It's getting solid numbers. Um, I do enjoy it. The highest compliment I can pay is that after the first couple episodes, it stopped feeling like homework, and I started watching it just for fun. Uh, which that's an issue with a lot of these shows. If you're in the media, it's like that's where I think a lot of the Marvel fatigue online comes in. Is that you're dealing with people that have to watch all the Marvel shows, whether they're enjoying each one or not. Um, people, regular people don't watch every single Marvel show in the same way Marvel comic fans don't walk into a shop and buy every single Marvel comic that's available in a given month.
Of
They read
course.
what they like.
Of course.
Um,
Yeah, they're able to pick and choose. But I do want to talk actually about a DC movie that you saw recently, and that was Black Adam. So what did you think?
yes. Now the review embargo is tomorrow at 9, so I have to tread carefully here. Social media is fine, so we can just pretend I'm quoting a tweet or something. Besides, I like the film. I don't think I'm going to get in trouble for saying it is fun. You should go see it. Um, it is an enjoyably goofy, unapologetically silly, and gleefully violent in a kid-friendly PG-13 way. Dwayne Johnson is basically playing to his strength. He's playing an over-the-top, biggest, strongest, mightiest thing ever. And I tend to think he's more fun when he's playing something closer to an underdog, like in Jumanji, where he looked like The Rock, but he was, a shy 10-year-old kid in his body. But I digress. Um, the film looks really big. It is budgeted closer to a Warner Brothers movie than a New Line movie, so it will have to actually do well globally. Um, it it looks different enough from the previous DC films to stand on its own in the same way that Birds of Prey did not look like Aquaman, and Aquaman did not look like Wonder Woman, and Wonder Woman did not look that much like Dawn of Justice. And that's what people say they want out of the DC films, are these standalone, singular motion pictures that kind of sort of exist in the same universe. I mean, this isn't a spoiler. Viola Davis's Amanda Waller is in the Black Adam from the Suicide Squad. That's in the trailer. That's not a spoiler. So it absolutely takes place in the same universe as Batman v Superman, Man of Steel, Wonder Woman 84, et cetera, et cetera. It is a lean, mean 2-hour picture, counting credits. There is a mid-credit sequence, but whatever. And it's the kind of film that reminded me in a good way of when comic book superhero films were big, expensive, would-be tentpoles that were still just one big movie in a slate of other big movies and weren't do or die kingmakers for the studios.
So do you think
Where
we are? Oh, continue, continue.
no, go ahead.
Do you think we're going to see a Black Adam 2 then?
I don't know. I mean, I'd like to. It depends on how well it does. I mean, that's the number one question. I would surmise that the reviews will be decent because it's fun. And I think my kids are going to, I'm going to take them. The screening was 10 in the morning, so I couldn't take my kids, but I am going to take my children next Saturday. I think we're doing the Woodland Hills IMAX or Dolby, whichever time is easier. And I think they're going to enjoy it because it's goofy, it's colorful, it's funny. There's lots of fun supporting beats for the Justice Society characters, played by the likes of Noah Centineo and Pierce Brosnan, and Aldous Hodge as Hawkman makes an impression. So there's lots to enjoy in terms of these films just being fun tentpoles that don't, that don't hold the fate of the entire industry in their palm, which unfortunately has become the case over the last several years. Um,
So I'm not going to ask you to spoil it if Henry Cavill is in the movie, but do you think that's going to get people to go to the theater to see, oh, is he going to make it a cameo as Superman?
I think we'll add exactly $100 to $300 in overall domestic box office. I mean, yeah, I don't mean to be a jerk, but I mean,
That's not why people are
general
going.
audiences were not they were indifferent toward Henry Cavill's Superman in Man of Steel, Dawn of Justice, and Justice League. I'm not saying they liked him or didn't like him. Honestly, he was very good in all three pictures, regardless of what you think of those films. In the same way that Brown and Routh was very good in Superman Returns. Um, but this isn't a case of Hugh Jackman coming back as Wolverine, or he did not create the cinematic bond, if you will, compared to say Chris Hemsworth's Thor or Chris Evans Captain America or obviously Chadwick Boseman's T'Challa, or for that matter, Jason Momoa's Aquaman or Gal Gadot's Wonder Woman. He was just some guy that played Superman in this version.
God, I do want to transition now to Marvel. So we talked about this a few weeks ago, that the director for Blade left the project, and so which led to the film's release date being pushed back. So that kind of scrambled all of Marvel's future release dates. Can you talk about that?
Yes, and I should have brought up those release dates before I began this podcast, so I'm going to stall for a minute and bring up the post that I did on that a couple weeks ago. For the record, I think to the extent that there's any quote unquote trouble for Marvel in terms of Blade getting delayed and losing a director, it is only trouble for Blade. It doesn't mean anything about the other movies. As we saw during COVID, because the release dates are basically boom, kada boom, bada boom, bada boom, as goes one, the others all get shifted to the next quote unquote slot. And that's basically what happened here.
Could there potentially no longer be a Blade, or is it just getting postponed?
Want to speak out of turn, and this would be total speculation. But the fact that John Cheadle's Armor War went from being a Disney Plus series to a movie, it would not shock me. And again, this is total speculation. If Blade went from being a PG-13, mostly bloodless vampire movie to being a Disney Plus series that maybe is closer in tone and content to the Netflix shows that now currently air on Disney Plus. I think that would give them more breathing room in terms of R-rated content for a character whose whole thing is that he kills vampires. I think it would lessen explicit comparisons to the movie, or at least the first two movies that were very well liked. Because again, you don't need a Blade movie in the MCU. Everybody knows who Blade is. And even if he's not played by Wesley Snipes, the iconography is pretty apparent. You put Mahershala Ali in that costume with those sunglasses and with that sword and machine gun, everyone's going, oh, that's Blade. And that's the same situation with the X-Men films, but I don't know what they're going to do with that one way or another. They certainly have some wiggle room because you're not going to see an X-Men movie at least until like 2026, if not long after. And I think that's good. I think they're holding X-Men for as long as possible because that may be their last big trump card in their deck.
So do you think that this shuffle is a good thing for the MCU or a bad thing?
I think it's neither good nor bad. I think obviously it's a good thing that if Blade is having problems that they're delaying it rather than rushing it to meet an arbitrary release date. I think Avengers Secret Wars moving from November 2025 to May 2026, so now it's a year after the Kang Dynasty and not 6 months after, is both a good idea and was inevitable. They were never going to open two Avengers movies 6 months apart. If you want my opinion, they were just doing that to have a release date set in stone that they could slot another Marvel movie into. So I don't want to say it's much ado about nothing, because I think it does say a lot about in terms of, is it worth it to make a Blade movie that will never be compared to an R-rated, relatively violent Wesley Snipes crowd pleaser? Again, I think it will make money. I don't think Blade is going to flop if it ever, assuming it gets made as a movie. But I think it's a situation where so much of Marvel's popularity has been in terms of establishing the definitive cinematic portrait of these characters. When people think of Thor, they think of Chris Hemsworth Thor. When they think of Iron Man, they think of Robert Downey Jr.'s Iron Man. But with Blade, more so than even Spider-Man, because Spider-Man's a character that gets, redone a lot. Mm-hmm. When you think of Blade, you think of Wesley Snipes. And that's a challenge that makes this franchise unique to the MCU and perhaps insurmountable in terms of pop culture. So, I mean, will they make a Blade movie? Maybe. Will it be decent? Don't know. Will it make money? Probably. Will it supplant the Wesley Snipes films in pop culture? Probably not. And the question is it worth it to spend the time and money and effort on a Blade movie when you know it's probably going to always be second best?
Yeah, especially with all of these problems. Well, Scott Mendelson, thank you so much for joining us today.
It's an absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me.